Hello everyone. So I wanted to make this video kind of walking you through how you can do a standard pattern in a Schweizer 300 Cbi helicopter. Now, general disclaimer, this is not intended to replace flight instruction if you're trying to fly an actual helicopter. You know, if you're flying a simulator like I am here in X-Plane 11, that's fine. I'm flying X-Plane 11 on Linux, and this is the vSkylabs 300 Cbi that I'm flying here. So a couple of things about that. Number one, if you are flying it in the sim, there is a governor option in the sim, but the actual helicopter doesn't have a governor. So, you know, if you're trying to fly this thing in real life, I would recommend that you do not use the governor. I think it's kind of a cheat, if you will. It is going to be slightly different because there's no correlator in the simulator. And if you don't know what a correlator is, when you raise the collective, it is a mechanical linkage that will automatically increase the throttle. So you can think of it as doing 80% of the throttle work for you, and the rest of the throttle work is going to be done by tweaking the throttle manually. Now, when it comes to the way that you hold the throttle, you know, my recommendation is that you hold it as shown in the picture here. So you'll see that I'm using my pinky and my ring finger pretty much for raising and lowering the collective, and I'm using my first two fingers and my thumb to twist the throttle. Now again, in the actual helicopter, if you let go of it, it'll just dwindle. It'll go down toward idle all by itself unless you have some friction on the throttle. And you can basically just kind of catch it, just kind of squeeze it. If you squeeze it a little bit, it tends to turn the throttle up a little bit. So in the actual aircraft, it's sort of a matter of letting go of it and grabbing it as you move the collective up and down. Okay. So first thing we have to do is we have to get up in the air. So right now we have a low power setting. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the throttle up. I'm here at the Mount Pocono Airport in Pennsylvania. So eventually I get up into my green range, and the helicopter will start getting a little bit light on the skids as I pull the collective up. Now the first thing you're going to notice is it's going to try to yaw to the right. And the reason for that is that the rotor is rotating counterclockwise as viewed from above. So the rest of the helicopter wants to rotate the other way, which causes it to yaw to the right. So I'm looking out in front of me, and as I bring up the collective, you can see that it's starting to get a little light and it's starting to move. All right. So I'm going to push forward, and now I'm in my first phase. All right. So what's that first phase? As soon as you start to move, it changes the airflow. Right. And if you're a helicopter student, you've learned about this probably by now, that when the air goes straight down through the rotor, it's sucked down through the rotor, it's not very efficient, and you generate a ton of vortices. So what you want to do is you want a situation where you're going to, instead of generating all those vortices and having this vertical flow, you want to have more of a horizontal flow. And that's what we call transverse flow. So as you start to move forward just a little bit, 1 to 5 knots, typically we say, what you're going to find is that that forward edge of that disc is getting more efficient. It's getting more lift. Now, because of gyroscopic precession, you feel that 90 degrees later. So if the forward part of the disc, as shown in the picture, is getting that enhanced lift, it's like I'm getting my left wingtip, if you will, with more lift, which is going to cause me to roll to the right. So, if I'm looking straight out in front of me, this is something that very quickly I will just automatically fix. The helicopter starts to roll to the right, and I'm going to push it back to the left with a little left cyclic. Right, so that's the first thing that's going to happen. As I accelerate, I start to outrun those vortices, and then I approach what we call ETL speed, effective translational lift speed. So as that rotor becomes more effective, and you can see how the air is flowing, it's starting to be a lot less vertical and more horizontal. And I'm outrunning all of those vortices that I'm creating. So I get more lift. So what happens when I get more lift? Well, a helicopter wants to go up, but you don't want it to go up just yet. So, as you start accelerating, it's going to try to climb, but you're still going kind of slow, and you don't want to climb just yet because you have your height velocity diagram, your HV diagram that says, hey, if you're more than maybe 8 feet in the air, you should probably be going at least 60 knots. That way, if something bad happens, you're not going to be in a really bad way. Right? If you have to do an auto rotation from 0 airspeed, you're going to have a bad day. So, putting that into practice, we said we're going to start creeping forward nice and slow. We might have to give it a little bit of left cyclic so that it doesn't roll to the right. And then as we accelerate, it's going to try to climb. So to compensate for that, we're going to drop the collective just a little bit. So we're going to drop the collective just slightly. And we're going to get to about 40 knots. Once we've gotten to 40 knots, then we will push forward some more, and we will start to raise the collective to a climb power. I should be able to get, with the current weather conditions, which is what I'm flying in here, I should be able to get 25 to 27 inches of manifold pressure in order to climb out. Then I'm going to climb out around 60 knots or so. VY is actually 41 knots, which means that's where I could climb the fastest, but that is not in keeping with my HV diagram. All right, so starting from the beginning, throttling up. Anticipating a little bit of left pedal. Starting to raise the collective. A little left pedal. Starting to crawl, just going forward nice and slow. All right, so we're speeding up here, and there's my 40. Giving a little bit more throttle. Pushing forward a little bit more, getting that speed in there. All right, let's go ahead and fly our pattern. Throttle up. As we get light, we'll anticipate a little bit of left pedal. We might also need a little bit of left cyclic because of translating tendencies. The tail rotor blows that direction. So, all right, so I'm going to start to lift just a little bit, getting a little light, looking out in front of me, checking my RPMs. They still look good. I'm going to tweak the throttle a little bit, starting to get a little light, and There you go. We're off the ground. So I'm going to push forward a little bit and just start creeping forward. Nice and slow, especially if I have one of those high density altitude days where it's nice and hot and humid. And if I'm at a high altitude, that doesn't help either. All right, and so now I'm going to start pushing forward some more and pulling up on the collective because I have exceeded my 40 knots. All right, so I want to climb out. And as I'm flying, I'm checking things like my trim strings. And again, primarily I'm looking out in front of me. You normally want to be looking in front of you, not behind you, when you're flying any aircraft, including a helicopter. All right, so I'm at 2,400 feet. Which is about my traffic pattern here, flying a 500-foot pattern. So I'm going to start to reduce power about 20 inches or so, like 19 to 20 will typically hold me at an altitude around 60 or so knots in the Schweizer. So let me go ahead and turn my crosswind. I'll call my crosswind. Mount Pocono traffic, helicopter 496 is right crosswind for 31 Mount Pocono. All right, as I come around, I'm going to turn my downwind. Mount Pocono traffic, helicopter 496 is right downwind for 31 Mount Pocono. I bring it around. A little bit of right pedal. Trimming this out. And I get about midfield on my downwind. I'm going to start dropping my power. So I'm looking out in front of me. I'm trying to maintain this attitude, this pitch attitude. So I'm pulling the nose up a little bit, trying to maintain this constant picture. I'm going to drop to about 12 inches of manifold pressure or so. That'll start bringing me down. I'm going to start turning my base. Mount Pocono traffic, helicopter 496 is right base, 31 Mount Pocono. Coming around. Give it a little bit of up collective so I don't get too low here. And I overshot just a little bit, which is easy to do in a simulator because you don't see near as well as an actual aircraft. All right, so I'm bringing it in. And now when I'm coming in on my approach, I want to be looking for a consistent sight picture. I want to choose my spot. And if I'm doing a normal approach, I want it about this mid-level, which is going to vary depending on your height. You know, it's going to look different to you. So in the actual helicopter, a normal approach for me is kind of midway between the top of the console and the compass. A shallow approach would be at the bottom of the trim strings, and a steep approach would be kind of the top of the console. All right, so I'm going to aim for my spot here. And I'm using the collective to control my descent rate. And I'm using the cyclic to control my closing rate or speed. So as I get a little bit closer, I'm just going to start pulling back and just start dropping that speed. And as I drop my speed, I have to drop my descent rate as well. So it should look like I'm on a wire, right? And it should look like this helicopter is just descending on the wire. So, minus any pitching up that I do to change my airspeed, it should look like that spot where I want to land is in the same space during the entire approach to landing. So I'm looking for my spot. I'm still coming in. And I got about 50 feet or so. There's no real rush here. I'm just slowly slowing down. All right. Bringing down my speed by a little aft cyclic. Coming up to my spot, and I'm just going to slowly lower the collective. Again, still looking in front. And this is going to allow me to just touch down. Often we come down to a hover, but in this case, I'm just going to actually touch down onto the surface. Like so. And I'll go ahead and roll off the power. Helps me not to become airborne. Now, one thing you might notice is I'm not moving, and yet the helicopter is indicating a good 20 knots of speed. And that's because I always fly in actual wind conditions. And the winds are currently 20 gusting to 36 here as well. So you might have noticed a little bit of, let's say non-smooth movement. I'll at least claim that it wasn't pilot induced, right? So again, this is how you would fly a pattern in a Schweizer 300 Cbi. So how does it go again? You're going to first pick it up. You want to get it light. As you get it light, you're probably going to have to put in some left pedal. You might also have to put in a little bit of left cyclic. As you start to speed up and that front part of the disc becomes more effective, you're going to have to give it a little bit of left cyclic so that it doesn't roll right on you. As you speed up yet more, you're starting to run those vortices, and now you're going to probably want to drop the collective just a little bit so you don't get too much altitude, and then you can start applying your climb power. So you're going to pull up on the collective while simultaneously pushing forward on the cyclic. And you're looking to climb out around 50, 60 knots, kind of in that range. Here at Mount Pocono, we typically fly right patterns at 500 feet, which is 2,400 MSL. And, to level off around 60 knots or so is typically 19, 20 inches of manifold pressure. When you get to your midfield on the downwind, then you want to drop your power out nice and smoothly, start dropping the power out to around 12 inches of manifold pressure while simultaneously pulling aft on the cyclic to maintain that sight picture, which is going to maintain that speed that you have going on the downwind. right? And then as you pull up on the final, that's when you might add a little bit of collective if you're starting to get a little bit too low. But that way you kind of get a head start. You're not coming in super high every time that you're trying to land on final.
Back once again, it's the duo and back. Put the sounds of our generation new on the map. It's our bread and our butter, the food on our plate, with the content we cover and the music we make. Come on.
I've been known to kick back, kick back. I've been known to take your ass to run town. I've been known to kick back, back. Rip it like a cyclone.
Perfecting the feeling that we're bringing around with the masterpiece sculpted, created from sound. The rap with the flow from the cast that you know, adding cracks to the code, make the track so gold. Pack it and tag it like a Wiz group release. BitTorrent grabbing it, seed it and leech. Nerdcore is here, growing year after year, promoting word of mouth. This the new peer-to-peer. My multicast datagram IP flow spreads across routers, making every neck glow. Exponential growth, rate is out of control. Forced to DDoS to CMOS everywhere it goes. I stand for the purity of art and our craft, and the overflow buffer always causing a crash. Every track spit facts, vocal tones dispatched, always working hard, but I've been known to kick back.
I've been known to kick back. I've been known to take your ass to run town. I've been known to kick back. Rip it like a cyclone. I've been known to kick microphones, kick back. I've been known to
Mount Pocono traffic, helicopter 496, right crosswind, 31 Mount Pocono.
rip it like a cyclone.
Back once again, but you already know this is ultimate.
Keeping it nice and level.
Fans understand
Again,
when they
looking
see
out
us
in front of me.
shows. All the heads nodding to the beats, rhythm flows. This is for the listeners and downloaders too. My fellow
Turning my downwind.
I get a bit confused
Mount
when they
Pocono
say
traffic,
I'm the
helicopter 496, right downwind, runway 31 Mount Pocono.
on the planet. I talk about our lives, so the music is organic. Most rappers never do half of what they say, but we are really nerds and we live it every day. Explains and elaborates, defines and describes.
Getting out of my midfield,
Music, no one can deny.
dropping the power to about 12 inches.
So you know it's real no matter what was said by Morpheus.
I've been known to kick back. I've been known to take your ass to run town.
Letting it come down,
Rip it like a cyclone. I've been known to kick
turning my base. Mount Pocono traffic, helicopter 496 is base for runway 31 Mount Pocono.
rip it like a cyclone.
Now it's time that we win it, cause we're in it improved. Set 'em up.
Looks like I might be overshooting a little bit.
The C64 with the sickening groove. And dual cores
Get a little bit more bank than normal.
plan set in motion, now you're feeling the draw. Supplying the kickback is Newton's third law. Log in and blog with your open ID. Play the
And as
tracks
I
and
come
you
around, I'm
so
going to give it
on some program,
a little bit of
database,
collective.
IT Pro. Warp engines on, set to light speed
All right.
low. High definition
So
on
as I suspected, overshot just a little bit. Just get back over there.
It's not about the revenue, it's about the music making us into a better group. Never lose, coding all these open source clever tools. Write, read, know. Only thing we do is execute.
I've been known to kick back. I've been known to take your ass to run town. I've been known
This time we're going to go for a little bit more of a steep approach.
to rip it like a cyclone. I've been known to kick microphones.
So I'm going to put my spot right about
Take your ass to run
at the top of this console.
kick back. Rip it microphone. Rip it like a cyclone.
Now the fun thing about steep approaches
I've been known to
is that they're super slow.
rip it like a cyclone. I've been known to kick
And right now we're kind of on that back side of that power curve. Well, what does that mean? That means that to go slower takes more power. So that's anywhere below your lift to drive max speed. It requires more power to go slow than it does to actually go faster. And again, I have this huge headwind here, and that's making my life really simple. It's still about 100 feet up. And just slowly creeping forward. And as I slow down, I'm having to increase the collective. And if I ever get below ETL speed, then I'm going to have to start pushing forward as I pull collective and pushing for my spot. Now today, it's so windy that I might actually be able to land before I get to that speed. All right, so here we are, we're coming in. And touchdown, like so. And again, notice I'm still reading 20 knots and I'm on the ground. So it's a bit of a windy day, which is pretty common up here at Mount Pocono. Since I'm here, I'll go ahead and I will do a pattern. I'll do a shallow approach to a run on landing. So what's this all about? This is simulating what happens if you don't have enough power to actually come in into a hover. So go ahead and pick up here, raising the collective, waiting for it to get a little bit light, give it a little bit of pedal, creeping forward, creeping forward. There's my 40, pushing forward some more as I pull collective. Alright. Looking out in front of me for that consistent sight picture with my pitch. Now, one thing you have to be careful about, sometimes pilots get used to just looking at the ground and not necessarily looking at their airspeed. And on a day like today, where it's really windy, that can mess you up. Because, you know, we saw that we had 20 knots airspeed when we weren't moving. Alright, it looks like I might have to land after this one because I have a low fuel indication. So I should have put some more fuel in this thing. Okay, so there's my 2400. I'm going to drop my manifold pressure about 19 to 20 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my crosswind onto my downwind. And again, I'm looking out in front of me and I'm looking at that pitch attitude. And I want it to be about the same. There's my crosswind. You can see I'm getting blown sideways here. Mount Pocono traffic, helicopter 496 is right downwind for 3-1 Mount Pocono. Drop the collector just a little bit. I picked up a little bit of extra altitude. Alright, so here I am on my midfield. I'm going to drop that collective while simultaneously pulling back just a little bit because I want to keep that airspeed going. But again, don't just look at the ground, it'll fool you. Right now I got a tailwind, so my ground speed is a lot higher than my airspeed. Alright, so I'm going to turn my base, keeping it in trim, pulling those trim strings over. So remember, you drag them over and continue to turn. Coming in really shallow. Now you can see I'm only pulling 15 inches of manifold pressure. And, you might say, well, it's a shallow approach. Normally people would say around 3 degrees, which is a standard glide slope for an airplane. So if you're an airplane pilot, this attitude might look familiar to you. So I'm coming down the runway here. I'm doing, a good 60 knots airspeed. I'm going to start lowering the collective, pulling up just a little bit. Now this is going to be a little bit interesting today because today I have all this headwind. So normally people would say, hey, try to touch down right around ETL speed, but I think my winds are in excess of the ETL speed. So I'm looking down the runway again, coming in nice and shallow, still not using more than 15 inches of manifold pressure here. Just slowly letting it sink. And I should be making contact pretty soon. My airspeed's about 40, but my ground speed is, pretty low. It's like 20, which is more than acceptable. All right, so we're coming in, and once we make that ground contact, which should happen right about now, there it is. I want to use my pedals to steer and resist the urge to slam that collective down. So just let it slide. Use the pedals to steer, of course, as you get slower. They become a little bit less effective. And then once you're there, then the collective comes down and you can roll off the throttle. So that's a quick introduction to flying a pattern in a Schweizer 300 Cbi.